I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is The Mother of It All, where we take on motherhood through the lens of culture and culture through the lens of motherhood.
Hi, Mother of It All listeners. Welcome back to our series exploring the impact of the pandemic lockdown on parents and families. In part 1, Sarah and I discussed the results of our survey of almost 500 parents about their experience of parenting through a global pandemic and the ways in which those intense years continue to impact them and their families now, 5 years later. All month long, we're sharing conversations with a few of the survey respondents who had particularly striking or emblematic stories to tell. Today, I'm speaking with Christine, a mom in Brooklyn who had her 4th baby in 2020 and juggled 4 kids at home while also running a Montessori school. You gave birth in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
I did.
right? And but it was not your first kid. It was your 4th?
It was my 4th rodeo. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you had a lot. One of the things that I was really interested in about your story is that you had a lot to compare that experience to.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about like that perspective, how that gave you perspective, and also, you know, maybe how it made you also really understand what was different?
Well, I think one of the things about already having had 3 kids entering into that time is that the delusion of control had already left me by nature of having 3 kids. So there was something that was a little bit easier for me about going into my 4th kid is Penny. Penny's birth, where I was like, well, I mean, there's a lot that's not going to be in my control anyway. So I wasn't anticipating that, you know, here was going to be this perfect birth and this perfect baby. And, you know, that had kind of gone out the window. And so the volume being turned up on all the things that were out of our control during that time was still alarming, but certainly not to the same degree as if that were my first. And also I had formed an identity as a mother. And so I kind of had that going for me. And I realized as the pandemic kind of moved on in my role at work, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, like that was really probably the biggest thing I had going for me, is that I had already identified that with myself as a mom. And so this 4th kid was like, you know, there were certainly things like anyone who had a baby in 2020 that we were contending with, but because I had done this before and I felt like, you know, I figured I would be able to have the resilience to handle all the unknowns of that time.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, I think there's such a narrative that is, you know, relatable and understandable that like mothers were hit particularly hard. And I think we were, but it's also interesting to think about the resiliency that maybe like the work of motherhood builds up in us to sort of be also uniquely primed to manage that time of a lot of unknowns.
And I mean that I'll tell you that my second baby that I had, not during a pandemic, it was a far more challenging experience because there were so many other life factors that were going on. That baby had colic. You know, when I had this 4th baby in 2020, she was a delightful little baby, easy as could be. I was trying to keep a small school afloat during a pandemic, but other than that, I didn't have these other challenges going on that I had going on right after the birth of my 2nd kid. So in a way, funny enough, like I had a worse experience.
Oh, man.
Just based on like life circumstances and a very challenging baby and an older toddler who reacted horribly to this colicky baby in the house, which like, why wouldn't she? She was already a really sensitive kid, and her little brother screamed nonstop. And so, you know, I kind of knew already, like things could be pretty stressful, but I could appreciate what was going right, even within that time of the pandemic of like, I have a pretty easy baby. She's overall healthy. She did have there were some physical things going on. We needed to get her some services for that. But I could still appreciate like, okay, that's one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you write, that kind of gets into the question of logistics. Like, so you wrote that your husband was already a stay-at-home dad, is that right?
So we run a Montessori school in
Together.
Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Well,
okay.
So he runs the business side. So he is on the back end. So he's always been able to be at home and do what he does for the school from home. And then I'm more front facing at the school. My background is in education. And so I'm doing all the stuff that he's not doing. And we have a team of teachers, and I'm kind of, I'm much more in it on site, and he's able to stay at home and do what he does. So he's a working stay at home parent, but yes, he is able to be at home.
So, and so you mentioned too that in 2020 and then the school year of 2020, 2021, you pulled your third grader from school and registered as homeschool, right?
I did register, yes.
yeah. I mean, right. Because you have to, right? So I'm just interested in that time. That sounds like a really unique time. So basically you're home with 4 kids. And you were keeping your school going? I mean, what?
Yeah, the school opened. So we had to shut down in March, like everyone. And we were in New York City. So like we went first, you know?
Yeah.
And we watched parents kind of like flee New York City because we did go first. And there was kind of the assumption at that time, like if you could get out of Dodge, like maybe you just miss it. But it turns out we were just kind of like the canary in the coal mine there. But so we had to shut down, and then we reopened in the middle of July, whenever it was. I can't remember the exact date. At one time it was like burned into my mind, but in the middle of July, we reopened. My daughter was due to be born August 16th. I went back to work in person for 2 weeks and kind of like oversaw us reopening. And then my daughter came 2 weeks early. I imagine I was a little stressed out. So out she came.
Right.
And so then I was home because I had just had a baby, but I knew that the school was running and I was able to kind of be there for that little bit of time. It was our summer program. And then we went into the school year.
And you had a tiny baby.
And that school year, I had this teeny tiny baby.
And 3 other kids.
And the 3 other kids. And so at our school that we run, we went through the 2020 to 2021 school year without a single closure. We did not need to we remained open the entire time. Wow. We had an amazing parent community. Like we were just, everyone was kind of like, all right, let's do this. And I don't want to say so much that we didn't have a closure because we were careful, because that would do a disservice to so many people that were careful and also had to have closures because of exposure. But it was fortunate. I'll just say I appreciated it. And the parent community, I think, also appreciated it because there was some normalcy around that. But then in my home life, my oldest daughter would have been going into 3rd grade. She was in the public school system in New York City where they were doing this bonkers hybrid situation where it would be like 2 days you go in, 3 days you're on Zoom. Then the next week you're on Zoom for 2 days and you're in person for 3 days. And the schedule in and of itself just seemed so confusing to me, trying to look at it. And then knowing I had these 3 other kids and my son, my second oldest, he would have been a kindergartner. And we were like, no way are we putting a kindergartner on Zoom for a year. Like we're not even signing up for that. So the 3rd grader was the one who had been in school. Like she had done part of 2nd grade. And we just didn't want to isolate her from her siblings. It just didn't seem fair that she'd be in this house with a baby and a toddler and a kindergartner and like not be able to just play with them and be on their schedule and be in their world, but like instead log on to Zoom or some days go to school and some days not. it didn't seem like it would be additive. By that point, she was already a pretty avid reader. I was like, she's good. We'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
So we pulled her
Yeah.
and registered as homeschooler, registered her as a homeschooler. And when she went back, I will say this, when she went back in 4th grade, didn't miss a beat. I didn't notice her being not a single step behind her peers.
Yeah.
If anything, she was maybe a bit ahead because she had had so much continuity for that year.
Mm-hmm.
And she just kind of waltzed back in, and that was that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not, it's in 2020, my son was 2, like when it all kind of started. And he was right at the age when he was getting interested in other kids. And I think having 4 kids, even though it sounds really hard, it's also like they weren't alone. Your kids were together. That sounds actually
we had
really
been
lovely.
building the pod, not even knowing what we were building the pod for.
Yeah, you had a pod. We
had
pod.
a pandemic pod.
That's what you were going for. You just didn't know. Well, I'm really curious also about your unique perspective as a person running a school. So one of the things you wrote was that you had already formed an identity as a parent by the time 2020 hit. And so you felt that made it easier to make decisions about what was best for your family and for your kids without a heightened fear of judgment. But you observed the parents in your community, especially the ones who were first-time parents in COVID. And you say that we talk a lot about child development, but it was parental development that you think really took a hit in that time. And so I thought that was a really striking way to put it. I'd love to hear more about that idea.
Yeah, I think, whenever you're looking at identity formation, that's happening in a social context. Like people have to bounce back to you what they're reflecting about this identity that you're building, particularly in parenthood. And so you want to be in situations where people are reflecting back to you your competency and your capability, and, you're getting some level of feedback from someone other than your baby that like you're doing this thing and you're doing it well. And I think I was looking at the kids, like when the kids came back after we had to shut down for a little bit, and granted our shutdown at our school was as quick as it could be for New York City. Like we reopened the day you were allowed to reopen. And what was interesting is when the kids came back, their expectations of the adult in the room were the highest we had ever seen. And so I've been now working with children ages 3, 4, and 5. Now we have elementary kids over there, but at that time we didn't. For 20 years to date. So what would that have been? I can't do the math in my head. So for 15 years at that time, I had been with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And I had never seen the heightened level of expectation of what the children expected of the adults in the room and the level of urgency that they expected them to respond to any need, which kind of showed us that there was a lot of overcompensation happening in the home during COVID. And the overcompensation was likely happening because no other adult was there to just reflect, like, you're already doing a really great job. You're probably well in the category of the good enough parent. And it's sad to think how much parents were needing to feel that out on their own in isolation, while, if the only feedback you're getting about your parenting skills is from your child, like, I've got to say, I think I'm a pretty good parent, but my feedback at home on a regular basis from the children would tell me otherwise. Like, they don't seem to be giving me like a very good score. I don't get a 5-star rating around here any day of the week.
It's often in the negatives, I would say. Especially my 3-year-old. She's not a fan.
Yeah, wouldn't you say it's like we can barely make a waffle right?
Or a banana. I mean, I can't,
right.
God
Like
forbid I peel a banana or
Yep.
not peel it. Or
Yeah.
I'm not
Depends
sure.
on the day. But the feedback is like a little rough from the kids. And so if that's your main source of feedback and you don't have this other adult kind of reflecting back to you how wonderful of a parent you are, it's a real, it's natural that it would move into the realm of overcompensation. And also at that time, you know, if we think back to what was going on then, like March 2020, I know you guys have done like a previous episode on this, but you know, Dr. Becky had her like first viral post at the end of March 2020. And so it was almost like we had parents in crisis with no child care. And then what was happening is people were, of course, turning to online sources to validate their parenting. And a lot of what was being told to parents at that time is like, well, if you just like attune to your child more appropriately, like this will be your path to ease here. Like you've got to understand where they're coming from. And it's like, you're telling parents in a worldwide pandemic at their most vulnerable spot that like, if they could just be doing a little bit more to attune to the child's feelings, like this will be what will make this all easier. And that's quite something. It's kind of the quintessential victim blaming right there to do that. And so, you know, that was like those were the waters they were swimming in at that time, in addition to not having this real life opportunity to be in community with other parents and reflect back. And
the pressure, you know, what you're getting at here too with Dr. Becky, you know, her whole sturdy leader concept. It's like, I don't think anyone felt like a sturdy leader in March of 2020. Like, no one. And, you know, and so the idea that you need to be ultra regulated for your child at a time when we now, you know, the American Academy of Pediatrics has fully referred to it as a time of collective trauma. It's like, you know, that's a completely unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
So not that you need to be like running around screaming all the time, but like maybe you're not going to be super regulated.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be kind of a hard time for everybody. Like,
yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't put all those pieces together in quite that way. Yeah. That's fascinating.
And the kids, you know, I thought it was funny. One time I said to one of my kids, I was like, well, I was just in a moment of like kind of depleted, and they were just laying in with some questions about something. And I said, I don't know, honey, I haven't lived through a pandemic before. And she was like, did you die in the last one? And I was like, that's a great like follow-up question. But at the same time, it does make you realize from the perspective of the kids, they had no idea that we weren't dealing with this every couple years.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Like, we knew that this was a once in a century event, but they had this natural resilience of like, do you guys do this every now and again? So the kids were kind of okay, but I did start to shift my focus on like, well, what is this doing in a bigger sense to parents who not only missed this social window of forming an identity as a parent, but then also were kind of being given these very lofty goals of attuning and, you know, the sturdy leader and understanding where their child's big feelings were coming from. And parents were having to be on screens a lot to do their job and make sure they could continue to make a living. And then there's all this concern about like the children on screens. And it just seemed like such a time for parents to kind of turn the blame on themselves for what was already a hard situation. And you couldn't bring in a lot of other stable forces who were not in the same, you know, working parent, no childcare crisis to be like, hey, you're fine. Like, it was very hard. We didn't have any babysitters coming to our house at that time. It was very difficult for us to even get family to come after Penny was born. And so you just had very few other people coming into the homes of families with young children to be like, look, this is going to be okay. These kids are going to bounce right back from this. Like you can go ahead and take it easy on yourself, because for the most part, they're going to be okay. It just was so, obviously everyone was worried about many different things, but I think parents really got put into a category where parents are already inclined to blame themselves for a lot of things. And so,
yeah, we do default. Wow. So terrible. Right. And I think there was so many of us were, I certainly was, sad and worried as I could see that my kid was craving other kids. And we had a neighbor across the street who had been his friend, little toddler friends. And right as they were getting more interested in each other, it was like, well, nope. And then we did masks outside and space. And so we were trying to get these little toddlers to play, but 6 feet apart in masks outside. And so I was worried all the time about like what that was doing to him. So like you talk about overcompensating. I mean, I think there's also my own fears for myself, for my safety, for my parents' safety, all everything. And then this little parental feeling of like, what is this doing to him?
Yeah.
And like, every single time, I think I still have decision fatigue from it. Like, I think that is still impacting me. And it's like the constant, like, well, should we just let him take the masks off? I don't know. We're like 6 feet apart. Maybe it's fine. No one has runny noses. But then I'll be anxious for the next 2 weeks. Or just, what does he need right now? What's the best thing for him? And having no idea.
Yep.
And operating kind of alone. And in an information void, really.
Yes. Yeah.
That was the whole deal. Well, so I'm curious for the life of your family, for your kids, for yourself, then, now, looking forward, how do you think those years impacted you? And what will stay with you? Like good and bad. What is the impact of all of this on your family life?
We asked them about it not that long ago. Like even before I got this survey that would have gotten my wheels turning, we were like, do you remember? We were just having dinner. Remember anything about COVID? And my oldest one remembered masks for sure. I think the second oldest remembered masks. The baby who was born obviously didn't remember at all. And then the toddler was just kind of like, who would have been a toddler at that time. Now she's 6. She didn't really remember. And my oldest one like still kind of thinks it's fun that she got to miss a year of school.
Yeah.
She's in 7th grade now and, does exceptionally well in school. And she's like, some of my friends still don't believe me when I say I didn't go. They're like, no, you just went online. And I say, no, I didn't go at all. and they're really jealous of me. She knows that was like, we made a decision that we were going to have a lot of sibling time that year. And she can pretty much vocalize to us now that she appreciates that. Like that she liked that she got to be at home. We did a lot of outdoor activities. We did a lot of just like hiking in like remote places to just get them out. And I think I think my son, it's hard to say because we don't know, we can't run 2 stories at the same time. But I do know that my son has struggled just a little bit more with school, but who knows, maybe he would have struggled more with school anyway. And he does pretty well overall. But there are things
how
like,
old is he?
So he's a 4th grader now. He's 9.
Yeah.
But like handwriting was so much harder for him. Like these foundational skills that it's kind of funny because like I was running a school and so my focus was on that. And I was kind of like, all right, they have each other socially, they're doing well. And I could kind of clock that.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't necessarily do too much to try to like fill in these foundational skills for him because there was a ton of my focus that was pulled toward keeping this school afloat.
And you had a newborn. I mean,
and I had a newborn, right?
Yeah.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah. And she was in PT. Eventually we were able to get her physical therapy 2 times a week. They wanted her to do it on Zoom. I'm talking about a baby under a year old. They were like, we'll do Zoom PT.
My gosh.
And I was like, I'm not sure if that's going to work. And we eventually got a person to do that in person, but we were dealing with some things with her special needs that was consuming us. So in one way or another, he could have ended up having these struggles with some of these foundational skills regardless. But I noticed that and I wonder about it. And then I kind of tell myself, like, there's no point in wondering too much because that was the hand we were all dealt. And everyone did the best they could during that time anyway. So like, what would we have done a whole lot differently? So maybe there's an impact there.
But, that was a theme in people's responses. I wanted to say, just to add, so many of the over 500 people who responded, like a lot of parental wondering, like, well, my kid has this. One of my kids has XYZ, whether it's like, autism spectrum disorder or motor delays or speech. They're in, speech therapy, and there's a lot of wondering, like, is that because, and I just, I relate to that too. And I wonder about what we were talking about earlier of the kind of like parental, like, did I not do enough? Did I take my eye off the ball? And I don't, for me, I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter the why, right? We move forward. But it's just interesting to me that parents are carrying some wondering or some almost guilt or stress.
Well, yeah, and I just did it there, and you were able to interrupt it, but I'm like, yeah, I wasn't working on those foundational skills. You're like, you had a newborn.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, right, yes, I had a newborn. And I think the wondering, it's like, yeah, it's okay. We wonder about a lot of things with, why are our kids turning out this way or that? But it is important to try to backfill what really was going on then and how much was on all of our plates. So at the very least, we can say, like, maybe I noticed this and can support it now, but there's not a whole lot that I can say, even though I started to go down that little, go down that path a little bit. There's not a lot I can say I would have done a whole lot differently. And I think one of the best things I told myself during that whole time about having these kids is like, they have siblings, they live in a house that's safe. I really like their dad, my husband. So it was like it was a safe, warm environment. They were eating every day. They were sleeping in a warm, dry bed every night. And I was like, you know what? Honestly, I can't feel too worried for these kids because it would almost be ungrateful to do so. This is like a pretty good setup they have overall. And I think I could appreciate that maybe a little bit more because I was hearing so much parental concern on the other side at the school. And I was saying, like, your child is so well cared for. Like, and also this is everyone's situation. You're just dealing with the hand you were dealt, like we all are, and doing an exceptional job. And so if I were going to say that to those parents all day, I had to offer myself the same message. And so I kind of did.
I think we could reflect on this for the next week or so and still be having realizations.
The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Knox Media with music from It's Electric. If you liked this episode, why not send it to a friend right now? Go on, we'll wait. You can follow us on Substack at themotherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox and connect you with the Mother of It All listener community. Plus, become a paid subscriber and get a hot off the presses Mother of It All canvas tote. We're also on Instagram at The Mother of It All, and you can email us anytime with ideas or feedback at motherculturepod@gmail.com.